The original Xbox is actually one of my favorite systems from the 2000s. Now, I can't call it the Xbox One anymore like I used to because, Microsoft and their weird naming schemes, but still, this system was great. It introduced a lot of features that we use now today and made them standard. And it came in at a good time because when this system came out, the Dreamcast was leaving the market. So we were going to go down to two manufacturers for consoles. So Microsoft just happens to step in and become the third and really the first American console since, the Jaguar at that point? So in 2001, when they introduced the Xbox, it was pretty cool. If you were around at the time, like I was online, and we were really talking on message boards and forums about rumors around Microsoft possibly buying Sega, we were talking about that back then actually, yeah, because we heard about Microsoft really making the rounds and trying to get into the console market. At the time, it seemed to start as Bill Gates' hobby or something he just wanted to do for fun. And even now that he stepped back from the entire company of Microsoft, they still keep the Xbox brand around, so obviously it's flourished and turned into something that seems to be here to stay, at least for now, from what we're seeing. But a lot of people really, I think, missed out on the original Xbox, where everything really started for Microsoft, and it's a system I really liked. Now, you might notice in the title it says the off-the-shelf Xbox. You might be wondering what I'm talking about. Well, when Microsoft entered the console space, they used a lot of off-the-shelf components to build this thing. This is actually one of the closest systems to a PC, even more so than systems now. This actually uses an off-the-shelf Pentium 3 and a few other components. This is even one of the first times that I remember that NVIDIA actually got into the console space and partnered with Microsoft to build a full GPU for this thing, and it was a beast of a system. Now we're going to go ahead and break this system down and talk about what makes this thing work. And I'm excited to do that because, like I said, there are some really cool features in this system. They included a hard drive, they built in Ethernet straight up to the thing, and they even have it go up to 1080i. 720p is what most of us use, but it goes up to 1080i, and this is back in the early 2000s, so a very cool system, way ahead of its time with online. So let's take a look at the original Xbox. Alright guys, here we are with the Xbox. This one is kind of interesting because it's a refurbished model, so I'm sure that'll be fun. It has a little refurbishment tag here. So we're going to take this Xbox apart, take a look, check out some of the chips and everything, and just see what makes this guy work. Now, the one thing I remember about this is they decided to use Torx screws particular. I don't know why, but that's what they did. Whereas I remember the PS2 at least used Phillips head, and then of course the GameCube, as we saw in a previous video, used the Gamebit driver, which was probably the biggest headache because once you get past those, everything inside is all Phillips based. So it was just like the first couple of screws, and then you're good to go with standard Phillips stuff. So we're gonna get these padding off here. This is where a lot of the screws hide. And then they also have screws hiding under like stickers. From what I remember, there's one here. And we have to use a Torx, a T20 to get into this guy. So we're gonna go ahead and get these screws out. We should be able to then flip it over and take the lid off and get our first look inside of this guy. Alright, so we have all the screws out, lids off, and we got this guy up. So other than dust, honestly, this isn't in terrible condition, so that's a good thing. Sometimes you'll open these guys up and they're like just disgusting because they're older, obviously. This one, not too bad. I must say there's a lot of dust here, of course. But other than that, it's pretty good overall. Dust bunnies. So we're gonna get our first look at two things on the top here. You're going to see a hard drive and you're going to see the DVD drive here. Now, you'll notice right away these are both of these actually, for the most part. They did some modification to the DVD drive. For the most part though, these are pretty off the shelf, specifically the hard drive. It's actually a Seagate drive, and believe it or not, when people modify these Xboxes, they actually buy like pretty standard off-the-shelf IDE drives, and they can drop right in because everything lines up correctly. But they did lock these drives, so you couldn't really do much if your Xbox died. you would lose all your hard drive data. And that includes any of the music you would rip, because you could actually rip music with this, which was pretty cool at the time. Put a disc in, like a music disc, and you could actually rip all of the tracks off, and you could actually keep them there without the disc being around. That was a big deal back in the early 2000s, believe it or not. We didn't really have a lot of that. So we do have, we have Torx at the bottom here, and that's why I have my little extension guy. That's something you're going to want when you work on these original Xboxes, is an extension, because you have to reach pretty far down, like down there in some spots and everything. So let's get a little further in here. They do change the Torx sizes on you a lot as well. As I see here, they want me to use looks like a smaller one for some of these. Let's try a T10 on this guy. Yep, there we go. All right, so this will let us get the disk drive and the hard drive out, and we can actually then take a look at the motherboard pretty quickly. Getting into the Xbox isn't bad. It's just when you get down to the motherboard, it starts to become kind of a pain. But we should be able to take a look at the GPU, the CPU, which should be a full Pentium 3, which is pretty cool. And we'll kind of go from there. So let's get all of this out and we'll take a look. There's our disk drive, though. The hard drive. This is it's actually a full Seagate. It's a full Seagate hard drive. This one is a 10 gigabyte drive. That's what they put in all of them. 10 gigabytes was a lot back then, though, because consider something like a PlayStation 2 memory card that saved all of your save data was 8 megabytes. I mean, we really didn't need memory cards unless we wanted to move our data back and forth and back it up. But you really didn't need it. And every system having a hard drive really helped with the online components, since we knew, like the manufacturers knew, that everyone had a hard drive right out of the box. So you didn't have to plan for people not to have that hard drive, which was really good at the time. That really helped, obviously, with the online component being a thing as they really pushed that. So let's get this disk drive out. This is a Philips DVD drive. This one uses a pretty standard laser, but it is customized at least for the Xbox for the power cord, but it does use a full IDE pin set still, so it's not terribly different. Again, you can kind of see what happened here with the Xbox using some a lot of off-the-shelf components. There's a lot of dust here, so I'm actually going to clean some of it up real quick before we go further. So I did just clean it out. The best way to clean out loose dust very quickly, take it outside, get some compressed air, just blow it all in there, and it'll get it all out for you really easily. Gonna just take the IDE cable off there, and we get a good look at the audio processor right here. I'm gonna show you guys a picture real quick. And this was done by NVIDIA. It's the MCPX, aka Soundstorm. That's the name they went with for it, the Soundstorm. But it's the audio processing unit. It did let it do 3D sound channels up to 256 stereo voices. So it's pretty good chipset there for audio. And then of course NVIDIA provided that because they also provided the customized GPU, which we're gonna take a look at as we get this board out. They also included the power supply internal to the system, which I'm sure added to the overall weight. We like to call it a tank, as most of us like to joke around, because it's pretty heavy, but this is the full power supply here. Generally, you want to stay clear of that when you're opening these, because they can still hold a bit of a charge and give you a little jolt. So we'll go ahead and start taking apart the motherboard and get that out. And we'll just go ahead and start unplugging the power supply as well. And then we can kind of take a look around the board after we get it out of here. Something else that's worth pointing out, actually, before we go further, the controller ports, believe it or not, actually share a lot of similarities with USB. Again, a lot of off-the-shelf components here that people realized as modding started to take place. So you could actually wire up a female USB socket to this and actually run it outside, and then you could use it for things like USB sticks and extra controllers and stuff. That was an actual thing at the time when we started to mod these, is that you could seriously run an entire USB cable out of here. That way you could plug in your memory stick, your flash drive that was kind of designed to help modify it. That was a real thing at the time. So yes, more off-the-shelf components there, where you could just wire USB completely to one of these controller ports. They also used like a retention lever for the heat sinks for the CPU, and even the GPU used one as well. Pretty funny. That again, that's something we would use in our at the time CPUs. You'd use like a retention lever to hold it down. So they did a very similar thing here. All right, so we got our motherboard out now. So we'll take a look around this. That's pretty much it for the chassis. We're just going to put that to the side because there's not much there other than the fan, which does use a 2-pin header despite having 3 pins, which is always weird to me to see that on the motherboard. Let's go ahead and put this aside. And let's take a look at our motherboard here. So we're going to go ahead and get these heat sinks off, and then we'll take a look at the chipsets and everything and see what we have. You pretty much have to play with the kind of the retention lever and the lock there to get that off. And that should be our CPU. And then we have our GPU under here, which we probably have to unhook the best we can. Again, they kind of lock these on there kind of funny. Sometimes you have to use a screwdriver very carefully to unclip it because it gets kind of seized up over time. So that's kind of what I'll do here just to get this guy off. There we go. So we should have both heat sinks off now. So that was on there really, really well. It looks like the compound on there is so old that it's actually like crusted over. That's great. So we're gonna have to clean this guy off a bit. But this should be our, it's coming off. Yeah, it's just very, very old compound. But this is our NVIDIA chip here. I'm gonna go ahead and try to get that off. Some alcohol should hopefully get that off. So the compound was actually seized on there really, really well. So I'm actually going to give you guys pictures of both the CPU and we have the GPU here and the CPU here. I'm going to give you guys pictures of both of those now so you can take a look at them. All right, let's start with the CPU. The CPU is a 32-bit, 733 megahertz Intel Pentium 3. As you can see here, it is a 2001 processor using the PGA2 package. So it is soldered, but it is still using that PGA2 package that most of us were used to with straight up motherboards at the time that would have socketed spots for your CPUs. I mean, this was a pretty good processor at the time on a console. I mean, think about it. At the time, we also had like the GameCube with like a 450 megahertz processor, and then the PS2 down there, much lower with like a 200 to 300 megahertz processor, depending on what it needed to do. The GPU accompanied it, as we talked about, with that heatsink right next to it. The GPU is that custom chip that was designed by Microsoft and NVIDIA together. Interesting story between them, by the way, with their history of them kind of playing chicken against each other when it came to like cost and everything around the chip. It's a pretty interesting story. It's worth looking into. But the chipset, 233 megahertz NV2A, was capable of 5.8 gigaflops as a raw performance standard, but it did some really cool things. For example, the Xbox could do things like bump mapping. So if you look at something like Chaos Theory, Splinter Cell Chaos Theory on the PS2 and then jump over to the Xbox, it's a night and day difference. It's very interesting to see. We'll take a look at the RAM as well. It has 64 megabytes of DDR SD RAM at 200 megahertz. It was in dual channel. There are 2 chips that it would pull from, split up at 32 megabytes apiece. Now, if you had an older Xbox, I remember doing this, you can actually add RAM to it, double the RAM for things like MAME when you would put that in, or if you would use XBMC, the Media Center based OS for it, that would actually take advantage of it, but most games were pretty much designed specifically with 64 megabytes of RAM in mind, so you really wouldn't get much out of it if you tried to upgrade it for just purposes of making the games run faster. This particular Xbox is a later model, so it should be an Xbox 1.6. The reason I could tell that is because it does have the Cyclops chip, which is when they kind of started to fight a bit of piracy, or at least think more about it, as the BIOS was not flashable anymore and was actually ROM-based instead of flash-based. So that was something they did, I guess, to really try to stop piracy or really try to fight it. But at this point, with Xbox 1.6, this came out a few months before the 360 really started to make headlines. So this was pretty much the last revision of the original Xbox they came out with, and I just happened to open, I guess, one of the last ones that they really did. And there we have it. That is the Xbox original motherboard. Took a look at everything: the CPU, the GPU, the Cyclops chip, both RAM modules, and then the audio processor from NVIDIA. Very interesting system. The board is pretty thick too, so they definitely went quality with this system. The only weird thing that tends to take place with this that is kind of annoying is when there's a capacitor set up in here. You may notice there's no battery that actually keeps this alive when it comes to the internal clock. They actually used a capacitor, and that would actually leak and damage it. That's why a lot of Xbox now you turn on don't keep the time anymore because that capacitor is damaged and it just won't work. It actually leaks on the board in some cases and will damage traces that like under here that will actually run to the controller ports or just not let it turn on anymore. So it was a bit of a pain because the capacitors, especially around this time and especially in the mid 90s, were not good and they would leak all over the place. So that was one annoyance, because if it was just a battery, it'd be easy enough to resolder and change and we'd be good for another 20 years, but they went a different way with it. And guys, that's gonna do it for our look at the original Xbox. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a lot of fun taking the systems apart, taking a look inside, especially when you get inside of a system like this that, again, resembles a PC pretty heavily, with its processor being a full Pentium 3 and even a customized GPU with NVIDIA. Pretty cool to see. And that hard drive, while it's old and it's an ID 10 gigabyte hard drive, still kind of neat to see that in a console back when the PS2 and the GameCube were around. So let me know what you guys thought about this teardown, this breakdown of the Xbox. Maybe you had some cool memories with the system. Maybe it was your Halo box like it was for me for a while. We had that iconic startup, and then it kind of went to the Halo screen for me pretty much every time, except for, of course, things like Knights of the Republic, stuff like that. But let me know what you guys thought about this and any of your memories about the original Xbox. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.